It was a quiet October evening when I decided to take a solo trip into the Appalachian Mountains. I had spent weeks planning it, packing carefully, studying the trails, and convincing myself that I needed time away from the noise of the city. I didn't realize that silence could be much louder in the wild. The first few days went smoothly. The crisp air, the scent of pine, and the constant chatter of the forest felt cleansing. But on the fourth night, something shifted. The woods grew too still, the kind of quiet that presses against your chest. I sat by my campfire, staring into the darkness, when I heard a faint laugh, childlike, but wrong. It came from somewhere deep among the trees. I froze. The fire crackled and my mind told me it was just the wind, but my body knew better. That night, I barely slept. Around midnight, I heard footsteps. Slow, dragging steps circling my tent. My flashlight revealed nothing beyond the fabric, but the sound was unmistakable. Bare feet on damp leaves. I held my breath, listening. Then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. For hours I lay there paralyzed, until dawn finally broke. The next morning, I packed up early. As I started down the trail, I noticed something hanging from a tree, a piece of fabric, old and torn, tied into a knot. There were more, leading deeper into the woods. Against my better judgment, I followed them. They led to an opening, a clearing filled with crude shelters made of branches and mud. I stood frozen. Inside one of them, I saw something move. A pale shape, crouched low, its hair matted and long. Then it turned its head toward me. Its eyes weren't human. They were wild, distant, and aware. I ran. I didn't stop until I reached the main trail again. When I finally got back to my car, the forest behind me looked different, alive in a way I couldn't explain. I've never gone back, and I don't think I ever will. If you enjoy stories like this, real encounters with what hides in the shadows, make sure to subscribe and leave a like. There's always more to uncover. The second story comes from a man named Thomas, a park ranger who worked in the southern stretch of the Appalachians. He had been stationed at a remote cabin, responsible for monitoring wildlife and maintaining the trails. For the first few months, it was peaceful, but strange reports began coming in. Hikers missing food, others claiming they saw people living deep in the forest, watching them from the trees. Thomas didn't believe it at first, until one night while checking the perimeter of the cabin, he noticed something odd, a handprint on the glass. It was smeared, long-fingered, and far too large. The next morning, he found animal bones piled neatly outside his door. He radioed it in, but the static swallowed his voice. The signal had never failed before. For 3 nights, the forest didn't sleep. Thomas could hear whispers, rustling, and soft humming from the tree line. On the 4th night, he decided to confront whatever it was. He followed the sound to a ridge overlooking a small valley, and what he saw drained the blood from his face. Down below, near a creek, were shapes moving on all fours, their bodies covered in mud, their eyes reflecting the light from his lantern. There were at least 5 of them. They weren't animals. They were human, or what was left of human. One of them looked up, head twitching unnaturally. Thomas backed away slowly, but a branch snapped under his boot. The figures turned toward him. He ran, never once turning back. When he reached the cabin, he barricaded the door and stayed there until rescue came days later. He never went back into the forest after that. If you're still with me, take a second to subscribe to the channel and hit that like button. It really helps us keep these true stories alive. The last story happened in the winter of 2019. A couple named Eric and Melissa had rented a secluded cabin in the Appalachian foothills for a quiet getaway. They wanted to escape the chaos of city life, to enjoy a week of snow and silence. The cabin was old but cozy, surrounded by thick woods. No neighbors for miles. It was perfect, until the second night. Melissa woke up to the sound of something tapping against the window. When she looked, there was nothing there, just the reflection of the snow and the outline of the trees. But the tapping continued, rhythmic and slow. Eric got up, grabbed his flashlight, and stepped outside. There were footprints in the snow, bare, human footprints, leading toward the tree line. The next morning, they found their firewood scattered, as if something had been searching through it. That night, the sounds returned, scratching, tapping, and whispers. When Eric opened the curtain, he saw them, two figures standing at the edge of the woods, pale against the dark. They didn't move, they just watched. By the fourth night, fear had consumed them. They tried to leave, but their car wouldn't start. The snow was falling hard. As darkness fell, they heard something crawl onto the porch. Slow, deliberate steps. The doorknob began to turn. Melissa screamed, and Eric grabbed the fireplace poker, but before he could move, the noise stopped. When morning came, the snow outside was covered in prints, hundreds of them, some small, some large, circling the cabin. They were found 2 days later by a rescue team, cold and shaken, but alive. The team reported finding strange huts deep in the forest nearby, filled with bones, feathers, and crude carvings. No one ever explained what they saw that night. Some say the feral people still live there, surviving in silence, watching anyone who dares to enter their mountains. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because sometimes the scariest stories are the true ones hiding just beyond the trees. I was a forest ranger in the Appalachian region of North Carolina, and after 20 years in the field, I thought I'd seen everything the wilderness could throw at me. I was wrong. It was early autumn, the air sharp and quiet, when a call came in about missing campers near an old section of the trail that hadn't been maintained in years. I drove out before dawn, my headlights carving through the mist like knives. When I arrived, the forest was still. No birds, no wind, just silence so deep it felt alive. I found the campsite an hour into the woods. 2 collapsed tents, a smoldering fire, and food scattered across the ground. Whatever happened, it was fast. Then I noticed the footprints. Bare, human-shaped, but wrong. The toes were spread wide, the soles rough like leather, and there were dozens of them circling the camp. They led into the trees. Following the trail, I found pieces of cloth caught on branches, torn sleeves, a shoelace, even a scrap of nylon from a sleeping bag. The deeper I went, the darker it became. The canopy closed above me until sunlight barely reached the ground. Then I smelled it, a wet, metallic odor. Blood. I found the first body half buried under leaves, dragged by something strong. But what froze me wasn't the condition of the body. It was the fact that something had taken the time to cover it, as if hiding it from sight. That's when I heard the breathing, slow, deliberate, maybe 10 meters behind me. When I turned, something moved between the trees. Human-sized, but hunched, its skin pale and stretched over its bones. The face, I'll never forget it, was human, but wrong. The mouth was too wide, the eyes too small, and it smiled when it saw me. I ran. I don't remember how far. I just remember the sound, heavy feet slapping the dirt behind me, almost rhythmic. I never found the other camper, and when I returned the next morning with a team, the site was empty. Even the footprints were gone. I still hear it sometimes, when the forest gets too quiet and the wind dies, that soft, deliberate breathing just behind me. The second story comes from a woman who grew up in a small Appalachian town in Kentucky. Her name was Clara, and her family had owned a cabin deep in the hills since her grandfather's time. Every summer they'd visit for a few weeks, fishing, hiking, living without electricity. But after what happened when she was 17, no one ever went back. It started with voices at night, soft whispers drifting through the open windows. Not words, just the sound of someone trying to imitate them. Her father thought it was a prank, maybe locals messing with tourists. But then they found handprints on the side of the cabin. Long fingers, filthy, pressed into the wood as if whoever made them had been crawling. On the third night, Clara woke up to see someone crouched by the door. It was small, thin, its back arched unnaturally. She thought it was a raccoon at first, until it stood up. It was naked, covered in mud, hair matted down its back. Its mouth hung open as it tilted its head toward her. She couldn't scream, only watched as it pressed its face against the window. Her father burst in with a flashlight. The beam caught the thing just as it turned and bolted on all fours into the woods. They followed the next morning and found a small clearing. There were bones scattered in a ring, animal bones mostly, and in the dirt, shapes carved crudely with fingers. She still doesn't know what they mean, but she said the thing whispered again before they left. Stay. The third story was told to me by a rescue volunteer who worked the Smoky Mountains after flash floods swept through in 2018. He said they'd been searching for a missing family, a couple and their teenage son, when one of the dogs picked up a scent leading up the ridge. The trail ended near an old coal shaft, sealed decades ago, but someone had broken it open. Inside, the smell was unbearable. The light from their headlamps barely reached the walls. Then, as they advanced, something scurried across the floor. Fast, too fast for a human. They called out. No answer. Then they saw movement again, higher this time, clinging to the support beams near the ceiling. When the light hit it, the shape froze, limbs long and twisted, skin pale and slick with mud. Its eyes reflected the light like an animal's. It hissed, baring teeth too small and too many. The volunteers backed out, weapons drawn, but it didn't follow. They sealed the entrance again and marked it unstable. A week later, the missing family's car was found on the other side of the ridge. Doors open, keys still in the ignition, but no one inside. Locals say the mines run deeper than anyone remembers. Tunnels connected through the mountains, older than the records themselves. Some say those who get lost down there never really die. And if you've made it this far, it means you're drawn to the darkness like I am. So do one thing before you leave. Subscribe to the channel and leave a like. It keeps the stories alive and ensures the forest keeps whispering their truths.